This is incredible to be here, to see that all these people, because they still love Fidel, many of them. They have tears in their eyes, 500,000 people. I disagree with the policies of Fidel. I want change in Cuba. I'm a dissident. I'm a political dissident, but I hold the flag high because most of all, I'm a Cuban. These people really care for Fidel because Fidel gave them everything. They are dressed in red and dressed in blue. I'm a dissident, but this is Cuba, and these are my people, and I'm going to fight for these people, no matter what. I disagree with them, they might put me in jail, but I will fight for these people. Thank you.
I see the pain, I see the suffering, I see the desperation, and I bleed for this country. Please, please, help me end the U.S. embargo. Help me help these people. They don't deserve what they got.
To try to set the record straighter, I started working on my own story about Cuba, a documentary from my perspective, which would explain as best I could what was really going on as Cuba started the 21st century. And I think it would have been a perfectly good story, filled with cigars and trips to colonial cities, old American cars still running even though the auto parts store closed a half-century ago when the embargo began, incomparable Cuban music and art, and the remarkable people from all over the world that I've met here. I would have told my fellow Americans about a wonderful place and people, a place with problems to be sure, but certainly not a threat to the American way of life. But then I met this guy who told me he was going to have to end the U.S. trade embargo with Cuba because no one else was doing it. When Roberto Monticello first told me about ending the embargo, I'd assumed he'd been drinking, but he didn't drink much, so I thought he was crazy. But soon I found out that he was dead serious. In his adopted home in New York City, he's a respected, award-winning director of theater and feature films, but has committed himself to humanitarian causes before and been honored by the United Nations for helping feed the starving in Ethiopia and Guatemala. But his heart has always been in his native land. So he decided to try to end the embargo through his art by making films in Cuba.
In Cuba, I'm a political dissident. I fight for human rights. In the US, I'm some kind of communist. Why? I bring boatloads of medicine to Cuba to help people in Cuba. I try to end the U.S. embargo and the travel ban because it's cruel, unjust, and counterproductive. So I get it from both governments.
So in 1978, he swam to the U.S. military base at Guantanamo Bay, An escape route which was crazy then, but which would be suicidal today, given the security which surrounds what has become America's offshore dumping grounds for terrorists.
I would have died for this revolution, but this revolution denied me who I am. So I had to leave.
It is one of the last great examples of American imperialism, and now a place where American laws and ideals were being ignored by a few in the name of the war on terrorism, which the Cubans certainly had no part in. And with two enemy armies facing off, this remains one of the world's great flashpoints. The U.S. has other locations where it could do this same business. Closing the base and getting our military out of Cuba would end a 100-year-old occupation and give this place back to those who belong here.
Guantanamo must be given back to Cuba the same way Vieques was given back to Puerto Rico, the same way the Panama Canal was given to Panama.
And even though he'd left as a dissident, the Cubans accepted him as he began to work toward his goal of ending the embargo. But now he's gotten into trouble with U.S. officials because he's been caught smuggling boatloads of donated medicine into Cuba. He's a great humanitarian, but a lousy smuggler.
You don't make changes hiding in Miami. You don't make changes waiting for things to change so you can come back here and take control of the country. You have to come back here and help.
These are Cubans who could live anywhere in the world. They travel outside of the country regularly, but they don't defect. They return to Cuba, which doesn't fit with the propaganda that everyone is trying to leave the island. So these are some of the Cubans that your government is protecting you from, and some of the art and music that you won't be allowed to see and hear. And knowing that, I'm sure we can all sleep safer tonight.
This is a man or a woman that wants to show what they create to the Americans. What could be wrong with that? Well, how can that be used politically?
But when Castro fell ill, the parade to celebrate his 80th birthday was attended by many who would not normally come out for this type of rally.
Some of them don't want to be here. Some of them want Fidel to die, and some of them want Fidel to recover and go on, because they owe a lot to Fidel. A lot of the poor people in Cuba owe a lot to the revolution.
There were so many people we couldn't get a good vantage point to film it. So we were swept up into the crowd and wound up marching through the Plaza de la Revolucion with 500,000 socialists. We went right past the reviewing stand and no one seemed too concerned, which reinforced to me that we have nothing to fear from the Cubans and their government. So why do we want them to fear us?
What will happen in Cuba after Fidel Castro is no longer in power? People are suffering. The situation is so bad. But if the government of Cuba just collapses, it would be even worse. So what can we do? Why not help out? Why not work for better U.S.-Cuba relations? But first and foremost, we have to end the U.S. embargo and travel ban. It's a crime against humanity.
Federal agents were waiting for Monticello when he arrived back in the United States, taking him into custody and charging him once again with violating the embargo by visiting his homeland, a charge which he doesn't deny, and for which he faces further fines and possible imprisonment. Maliciosa.